Good morning, everyone. We are back with a new interesting day with our next session around Protect Data Protection Part 2. We saw yesterday a wonderful session which was covered by Disha talking about how you can leverage the entire Amazon Macy or as well as the S3 control. We are back with another interesting session. This session will include Data Protection Part 2 as well as couple of suggestions which we got from our audience last week thinking around AWS config, AWS credit store, which is secret manager. So our speaker will try to cover both aspects of it. With that, let me quickly start today's session and get our speaker live quickly so you guys can start hearing from her. So as you all know that we are in the series of this particular security posture, right? Raise your security posture series. We started like in the mid of March, and this is going to be like almost 4 to 5 weeks of series. Every weekend will on both Saturdays and Sundays will have different interesting speakers sharing the stage with us and talking about their personal experience as well as their expertise in the security domain. The objective of event is very clear that we will talk about the challenges, the things which we see day in day out when it comes to the security part of it, right? What are the best practices you need to do when you are handling the workload on AWS? As I talk about, like, or we heard from Shashank also in our first session, most of the attacks are more you guys are inviting the attackers by making some misleading configurations, right? And which is unintentionally. That's where we have designed this entire event that you guys understand what are the foundational practices or things or services you need to enable to protect your workload. And I'm talking about different the frameworks which are more acting as in validation to ensure that you have right posture. Here are our speakers for the different events. Like we have like somewhere around 8 to 9 different sessions for this last 4 to 5 weeks. So we have heard from most of the speakers like Aishwarya, Disha, Shashank. We'll have few more speakers coming up very soon for the upcoming weekends. So please stay tuned and join with us to hear from them. This would not be possible without our support and the active contribution from our community partners. We have community partners from AWS user groups like Nasik, Indore, Rajkot, and Dehradun, as well as we also have active support from our external community partners like UPSC CSA, CNCF Thane, and the DevOps community. With that, you can also subscribe us now on any social media platform. And if you subscribe with one of them, that should be fine. So you can state you are updated with the latest announcement and the notification of our new sessions, which is about the security, as well as any upcoming events which is happening on AWS User Group Mumbai. With that, we are on today's session. Today, we will be talking about exploring AWS KMS to enable encryption for data protection, as well as other topics, as you guys recommended in the last session. The best speaker for we have today to talk about this is Aishwarya Gupta. She did the same session last Saturday talking about this best practices. She's back again to talk about her exposure, her expertise when it comes to KMS and credit store. So, without wasting a single minute, let me get Aishwarya on the stage. Hey, Aishwarya, good morning. How are you doing today?
Hi, good morning. I'm doing good. How about you, Sanchit?
I'm doing good. And really, I appreciate, I know you are on vacation, but your dedication, I really admire that you took out time from your vacation to address our audience talking about KMS. So, for all the folks, Aishwarya had some personal commitment, but still that she made it that, okay, no, I want to be part of it and I would give back to the community. So, kudos to your enthusiasm and appreciate your hard work to get back and give it to community. Thank you so much.
Definitely, Sanchit. It's a pleasure. All right.
Sure. Let me get your screen on. Your screen is live. Please go ahead. The stage is yours. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Today, we'll be talking about some of the data security services, mostly AWS KMS, that AWS provides us with to be able to protect our data in transit and at rest while hosting our application on AWS. All right. So let's say you have an application that is currently running on AWS. This is a very simple architecture. So let's say you have some servers running with the database on the background. There are some S3 buckets, and there is a load balancer with a public URL. So using IAM, which we have talked about last weekend, we can manage the access of users to these services within our account. But what about if there is some data that is present inside S3? We cannot define who can encrypt or decrypt the data using IAM. For that, we have a service known as Key Management Service, or AWS KMS. So apart from the access to the database or to the S3 bucket itself, what KMS helps us in fine graining access to the data that is present inside those bucket entities or in those database instances. Elastic block storage, that is EBS, that is a backend of many EC2 instances. So we can implement KMS there as well. About encryption at rest, KMS server side. What about data that is flowing to our application from the Elastic Beanstalk to the Elastic Beanstalk? What about the data that is flowing in? So for that, we have something called as SSL certificates. So for transport layer protection, we can attach a certificate to our load balancers. Using that certificate, our data will be encrypted by AWS. All right. So now there are a couple of cryptographic services that are offered by AWS based on how much it can be managed by users or how much of it is managed by AWS. I've given a definition here. So, talking about AWS Key Management Service, it is completely managed by AWS. There's not much we have to do here. You just have to define a key and define who can access the key, and it will be completely managed by AWS. Then there is a certificate manager where we can provision SSL certificates. There we have a little more independence in terms of what all we can manage. We can upload our own certificates there as well. Then there is AWS Secrets Manager. In Secrets Manager, we have more control where we can manage the rotation of our secrets. We can define what type of secrets we are using. We can use custom secrets as well. And there is Cloud HSM. So Cloud HSM is basically, it is completely controlled by the user. What AWS does is it gives us something called as a hardware security module. It is a physical compute device that is assigned to you when you use Cloud HSM, and on that device you can run your own encryption algorithm. You can create your own keys, and that dedicated hardware is used for that, and you can use that hardware for encryption all across your application. So that can be used in terms of very strict compliance, where you need to use a custom algorithm for encryption. That's where you can use AWS Cloud HSM. So moving on, talking about our very first service for today, which is AWS Key Management Service, also known as KMS. What is KMS? So before we talk about it, what is a basic encryption, right? How do we encrypt data? Let's say there is some plain text data that you have. There would be an encryption algorithm that you use to encrypt your data, and there would be a data key. Using this key and this algorithm together, you will be able to encrypt your data, make it into ciphertext. This is what basic encryption is. So now in AWS, when you hear about encryption, it's mostly KMS. KMS is very widely used for encryption all across AWS. It is used internally also by a lot of services, as well as it can be used explicitly by users in some services. It is an easy way to control who accesses your data and how secure your data is on the cloud. And it is fully integrated with IAM. So along with IAM, you can use KMS to fine grain access of users who can access particular data present in a service instance, like in an S3 bucket, the data that is present, who all can use it, who all can decrypt it. That is what you can manage here using KMS. So in KMS, you can create what is called this cryptographic services, which you can use across a wide range of AWS services, as I mentioned, such as EBS, S3, Redshift, all types of databases, as well as Secrets Manager, SSM Parameter Store. so on and so forth. And you can look at the logs for compliance purposes and audit purposes. You can look at the logs of who has encrypted or decrypted anything using KMS API using CloudTrail. In CloudTrail, there is an encryption algorithm which is most widely used in KMS and AWS services. The diagram that you saw before is a basic encryption. Now, KMS uses something called as envelope encryption. What is envelope encryption? Here, there's an extra step. So, after you encrypt your plain text data using a data key and an encryption algorithm, that data key is also encrypted using something called as customer master key. Using a customer master key, your data key is again encrypted using the same encryption algorithm, and that key is then stored with your data in the storage location. This is what KMS follows. For this kind of an encryption, we need to use something called as a symmetric key, which we'll come to later. So, KMS key can be generated inside the KMS API, or it can be imported. You can import your own key inside KMS. The encrypted data keys are stored with the data, as I mentioned. The customer master key never leaves KMS. So, the master key will remain inside KMS and you cannot download it and use it to encrypt your data. And you can encrypt or decrypt data up to 4 KB inside API to be able to decrypt or encrypt your data. And you can encrypt or decrypt data up to 4 KB inside. Talking about customer master key, as I mentioned, you need a symmetric key. Symmetric basically means that you use the same key for encryption and decryption. There's only one key that is used, right? So all AWS services use a single key. That's why only symmetric keys are used, right? So all AWS services use a single key. That's why only symmetric keys are used across AWS.
Aishwarya, can you hear us?
And you never get access to that key. That key remains in KMS and you can that key remains in KMS and
Hello? Yeah, Aishwarya, you're audible. Can you switch off your webcam? I think there is some network glitch. So please switch off your webcam.
Okay.
I think that's
Okay, how far before should I start?
no. I think you can just slide 2 slides back. I think that should be fine.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay, let me just start. So we were talking about envelope encryption. So envelope encryption is basically a regular encryption, but with an extra step where the data key something called as then stored with the encrypted data. So envelope encryption is something that KMS follows all across AWS services. For following this type of an encryption, we need something called as a symmetric key. So in symmetric key, basically there's a single encryption key. This same key is used for encryption as well as decryption. And this key cannot be accessed outside of AWS. This remains inside KMS, and in order to perform any actions, we'll have to call the KMS API. So this is what symmetric encryption looks like, right? And then there is an asymmetric key option as well in KMS. So basically, in asymmetric encryption and decryption, there's a public key. Private key remains in the KMS service, and you'll have to call APIs to be able to decrypt your data. But the public key is something that you can download and you can keep it on your person, and you can use that to encrypt your data locally. This is used in cases where where the data is coming from, the customer is not able to access KMS, so they can just download the key, encrypt the data, and send it over to AWS. But asymmetric key is not used anywhere inside AWS. this is what asymmetric encryption and decryption looks like. We talked about a customer master key, right? So there are different types of customer master keys. There can be AWS owned keys. So as I talked about it before, AWS follows encryption internally across the account. In some services, encryption is already used in the background. This is where AWS owned keys come in place. Here we don't have access to that key. We cannot manage that key, and it is only for that particular AWS account, and it is rotated automatically. Then there is AWS managed key. So for some services, by default, they provide some sort of an encryption option where we can use something called as AWS managed key. The key is generated by AWS, it's rotated by AWS. We can view it, but we cannot modify it. All right, and then there is a customer managed key. So this is a key that we ourselves create. Okay, and we can edit this, we can edit the access to it, and we have to manage the rotation of this key. Now I keep mentioning rotation. What is rotation? Rotation is creating a new key and discarding the old key after a specific period of time for security purposes. So just in case your key is leaked or anything, such that you keep rotating your key such that your key is not usable for a long period of time, or even if someone else has access to it, it won't be usable after a certain period. We'll talk about rotation in detail after this. All right. Now let me go to the AWS console and show you. So here I am on the KMS console, right? This is the Key Management Service console. Here you have
Aishwarya,
these two options: AWS Managed Keys and Customer Managed Keys. As you can see, you cannot see the Hello?
Aishwarya, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think there is some network glitch at your end. Can you just check once? Can you stop sharing your screen and can
Yes,
you
sure.
check once at the network, please, for a minute? For all the audience out there, just give us like 2 minutes. She'll just change the network.
Hello? Hey Sanchit, am I
Yeah.
audible now?
Yes, you're audible now.
Yep, I have changed my network.
Please go ahead. Yeah, we can see your screen.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Apologies for the issues. Let
That's fine.
me
Please go
just. Yep. Okay. So now we're gonna go to the console and look at KMS itself, and I'll talk about different options on the console that come across. Okay, so this is the KMS console here. Here you can see AWS managed keys and you can see customer managed keys here. There are two different types of keys. As you can see, we cannot see the internal keys at anywhere here because they are internal to AWS. So if I go to AWS managed keys, as you can see, for each service, AWS creates a new key, and these keys have automatic rotation enabled. So these are regional keys. Keys can also be multi-regional, and they have automatic rotation enabled. We cannot edit them in any way. We can just view the metadata. Now going to customer managed keys, I'll just go and create a key. So the first thing KMS will ask me is if I can use symmetric encryption or if I want to use asymmetric key type. So if I want to encrypt a service on AWS, I have to use symmetric. So I've by default selected symmetric. Then key usage, if I want to encrypt or decrypt, or if we want to generate or verify MAC. This is not something that we are covering, so we'll just go for encryption and decryption. And then there is advanced options. So key material origin. So if you want AWS to create a key for you using their own encryption algorithm, if you want to import a key here, if you want to use Cloud HSM to create a key here, or if you want to use some other key store, like apart from KMS, some third party tool to upload a key. So I just want to use KMS. And there is regionality. So your key can be multi region in case let's say you have an S3 bucket where you are encrypting your data, and you want the bucket to have a cross region replication, right? So this data will be replicated to an S3 bucket in a different region. In that case, you want to have a multi region key such that that data is able to decrypt in that replicated bucket. So right now I just use a single region key, so it will be in this region, Northern Virginia. Now I go ahead and give an alias. So alias is just metadata. It's a name that you can give to your cryptographic key. So let's say I give it this name. So I'll tell you the significance of an alias later. So here I've given it a name. I can give it some tag, some description, and I can move forward. Now here is when we talk about a key policy. So uh, as we previously talked about, KMS is integrated with IAM, right? So here where IAM comes in. So who has administrative permissions to the key? Here we can define who can administer this key, who can edit the settings of this key, or who can delete or create a new key. So here I can give my administrator IAM user the access, the administrative access to this key. And then there is key deletion, allow key administrator to delete this key. So only this guy can delete my key here. I can also disallow key deletion. Now I go ahead and I have to select key users. So these people can only use this key for encryption and decryption. They cannot manage the key itself, they cannot delete the key. So if I select administrator again, only this guy can now encrypt and decrypt data using my KMS key, calling my KMS APIs. And I can allow other AWS accounts as well here to be able to use this key in case there are, if you're using AWS organization and your data is flowing from all of your sub accounts to your log management account, you should be able to give key access to the log management account such that it can decrypt and encrypt those logs that are being stored in S3. So now that I have completed all of these settings, as you can see in the summary here, these are my settings. This is my alias. I have not given any tags, and those administrator and user that we set up there, it turns into a key policy. So it's a JSON policy, very similar to an IAM policy here. And here you have given administrative access to this administrator guy. Here he has all of these access to the KMS key: cancel key deletion, schedule key deletion, untag resource, tag, delete, disable, revoke, right? These are all administrative privileges. And then there is user access. So now again, this user administrator has access to encrypt, decrypt, re-encrypt, and generate data key. All of these actions can be performed by key users. And then, as you saw, I selected that checkbox to be able to delete, right? So the administrative has also access to create grant, list grants, and revoke grant. So I finished creation of my key, and as you can see, my key has been created. AWS Demo 1. This is my key, and now this will be available to me all across AWS. So let me go to the S3 console, and I'll create an S3 bucket. So let me call my bucket as, let's see if this name is available. We create a bucket, then ACL disabled. Right now I don't want to work on ACL. I'll block all public access. My bucket is private. I don't want versioning on my bucket, so all of this is by default. And as you can see, since January of 2023, AWS has made it mandatory to have all S3 buckets the default encryption. So this is S3 managed key encryption. So all buckets at the least will have SSE S3, that is server side encryption, on S3 using S3 AWS managed keys. All right. And I can also use KMS here. So I can use my own key here. So if I choose from KMS keys, I can use this AWS Demo 1 key here to encrypt my data. All right. So I'll just create this bucket. Take a while. Yeah. So my bucket is now here. So now I have encrypted this bucket using KMS, right? So now let me just upload a file here. So I'll just upload this here. This file is now being uploaded to S3. Alright, now if I go to this file, you can clearly see here in this file that it has been encrypted using my KMS key, this key that I had created. Alright, this is the ARN. So now anyone who has the key user access will only able to download this particular object. So right now, if you can see, I can download this object as administrator because administrator had access to decryption of this particular encryption and decryption of this file, right? Now, but if I try to access this file using a different user, let me just see here. So right now I have auditor logged in here. Auditor has view only access on most of the services. So let me just go to S3. It's going to the S3 console. Here on S3 console, I will look for my bucket and the object in that bucket. So my goal here is to demonstrate how we can make access to data even more fine grade using KMS. So this is my bucket. I'll go inside the bucket. I can see this template. Let's try downloading it. See, now it's telling me access denied. Why is it telling me access denied? Because ciphertext refers to a customer master key that does not exist, is not in this region, or you are not allowed to access. So clearly, this auditor IAM user did not have user KMS key user access to this particular key that I have used to encrypt my data. Therefore, this user is not able to access this particular data. So even if using IAM, this user can go to this bucket, can access this particular object, but he cannot download this object and view what is inside this object, right? So this way we are making our access more fine grained to the data present on our AWS cloud. Now let me display something else to you. Now in this bucket, if I go and change encryption and I use AWS Managed Key here. All right, I've used AWS Managed Key, and now if I upload an object, let me upload, add file. I upload this here. Now if I go to this particular object, I can go and see it's encrypted using S3 managed keys. Now if I try to download this object, I can download it, right? Because AWS managed keys are accessible all across AWS to all the users and all the roles. Unless we explicitly deny it, now I can access the data. So it is recommended in this case, if we want to make our access to the data more fine grained, we use KMS keys, in which case we can define a key policy and we can define who can access that particular key and who can encrypt and decrypt data using that key. All right. So that was about KMS. Are there any questions on the demo?
Yeah, Aishwarya, I think there are two questions. The first one
Yes.
is, what is envelope encryption?
Yep. Okay. So let me just present this. So by encryption, you understand this basic encryption, right? There's some plain data. You use an encryption algorithm and use a data key and you encrypt your data, right? This is a plain, simple encryption. Now, the difference between this and envelope encryption is the addition of one extra step. So, as you can see here, it's the same process right now. The data is encrypted using an algorithm and data key, this encrypted data is stored in a storage. Now this data key using a master key is again encrypted. Now this data key is also encrypted using this customer master key which we were talking about, and it is stored along with the data. This is what is called envelope encryption, where the data key is also encrypted along with the data.
Awesome. There's one more follow-up question. Can I store my keys in a hardware store on-prem?
Yes, definitely. You can use your keys. So if you want to use your own keys in KMS, let me just escape this. Go to KMS. So in KMS, if I go to create key option here in advance, you can upload your own key. So you can import your own created key here, right? And you can still create a KMS key. But after a key has been created in KMS, if it's a symmetric key, you cannot access the key on your local, right? So you cannot, once a key has been created, an algorithm has been used on KMS, a key has been configured, such as this one, then you cannot download it. This is not downloadable, right? There's no way to download it. In symmetric key, you cannot download the key, but in asymmetric, you can download the public key. The public key is used for encryption of data. That will be downloadable. But in symmetric encryption, you cannot download it.
Cool. There's one more. Ideally, auditor role should not have capability to change the bucket encryption type from KMS to SSE.
Yes, definitely. I mean, of course, it should only have viewer access to all the services. I just curated that IAM user for this particular demo, but that is what I wanted to show to you, that even if my auditor has S3 full access, currently my auditor role has S3 full access, still using KMS, if I'm encrypting my data, I cannot download it. I can also not upload any data as an auditor. So let me show you that. If my bucket had KMS based encryption, I cannot also upload data to my bucket. So that way, KMS is making your access more fine grained.
Next question is,
Hello? Hey Sanchit, I'm not able to hear you.
yeah, no, I mean, you were doing the demo, so I was like, I stopped it. Yeah, please
Oh,
continue.
okay. Yeah, so I was just trying to upload a file as an auditor. So let me just go upload a file. So just go here, pick this README and upload it. And let's see if I'm able to upload. See, as an auditor, I cannot even upload the file when KMS is used for encryption because I don't have access for to encrypt the data. And to be uploaded in the S3 bucket, the data needs to be encrypted. So even if I have S3 full access, I cannot do this without using KMS. All right, go ahead. Please go ahead, Sanjay.
Yeah, there's one more question. What is the difference between KMS, HSM, and ACM?
Okay, so I'll tell you on a high level what is the difference. KMS is for creating cryptographic keys that are mostly managed by AWS for you. So here you don't have to do a lot of managing. You can just directly go create a key and use it on your AWS services. Whereas Cloud HSM is for cryptographic keys as well, but it is completely user managed. So there AWS allows you to provision a physical hardware module where your keys are stored, where your algorithm runs to encrypt and decrypt your data, and the keys, the algorithm, everything you can define there by yourself. It is not managed by AWS, so the managing, the maintenance, everything you have to do there. So it's the difference between KMS and HSM is basically how much it is managed by AWS. Now, what is ACM? So certificate manager, right? So KMS and HSM are both used for data at rest, data on the server side, data that is already in the destination has been encrypted. But what about data that is moving? So data that is flowing in from the load balancer into your application, or flowing in from an external URL into your AWS console, AWS application, right? What about that data? So to encrypt that data that is coming in from the internet, we use something called as an SSL certificate. So on transport layer itself, we perform encryption on the data that so that when it's flowing in through the internet, it is already encrypted, and you have access to that certificate. So let's say an attacker who's able to access your data still cannot read it. You'll have the privacy and security of your data, that your data cannot be read or cannot be spread or cannot be leaked if you use encryption in transit. So that is what ACM is for.
I think those were the question, Aishwarya. You can go ahead, please.
Okay, all right. So starting with the next slides, we've talked about this and key policy as we already saw on the console. All right. So if you don't define the users, administrators, and users for the key, there's a default key policy that is attached to your KMS key, where complete access to the key is given to the root user. That is, anyone anywhere in the entire AWS account has complete access to that KMS key if you don't define a key policy. And it gives access to the IAM policies to the KMS key. So all the IAM policies have access to the key. All right. Now, as I mentioned here in the slide, we were talking about key rotation, right? So, what is rotation? So, the next topic is about KMS key rotation. Now, basically, what that is, as I explained, is discarding an old key and creating a new key such that your key continues to remain secure, right? For customer managed CMK, which is customer master keys, the keys that are managed by a customer, we have to enable rotation. So AWS managed keys are already rotating at a particular time period, but for the keys that we create on the KMS console, we have to enable rotation. If we enable rotation, automatic key rotation happens every 1 year. So every 1 year, a new key is created. Previous key is kept alive so that you can decrypt old data. So once you have encrypted data with an old key, you will have to decrypt the data using that old key as well. You cannot decrypt it using the new key. So once a key is rotated, the older key is maintained so that any older data that is already encrypted, you first decrypt it using the older key such that no such data remains that is dependent on the old key, and then the old key is discarded. Now, here comes the significance of an alias. So, this new key and the old key will have the same alias in automatic rotation, such that you will have to go nowhere and change the value of the key, the alias of the key. Let's say you're using it in your application, you're picking it up from parameter store. If you have defined your key using the alias, you have to go make no changes there, because in automatic rotation, both the key will have the same alias. But if you want to manually rotate your key, let's say if you want to rotate your key for less than a year, you want to rotate it every 90 days, every 180 days, etc., then you have to manually do this process. In that case, new key has a different CMK ID. As previously saw, the ID is also the same, right? The alias is the same. Here you have to make sure that you keep the alias as same, such that you have to make no changes. So since the new key has a different ID itself, I have to make sure the alias is the same for both keys. So keep the previous keys active so you can decrypt old data. Similar to the previous one, you will have to keep the previous key present until all the older data is decrypted. And it is better to use the alias same here such that it is easy to reference them. As you can see, the ID is not very human readable, in which case an alias is significant here. So let me just go to the console, go to KMS. Look, so this is my key, AWS Demo 1. I go to key rotation, right? So it's giving me an option to automatically rotate my key every year, right? But if I don't want to do it every year, then I'll have to write a function, let's say a lambda function, that automatically creates a new key with the same alias name. And then once keeping an eye on my older data, when all of that is decrypted, it disables this key. There's also one more thing about KMS here. If you want to delete the key, you cannot just delete it right away. You have to schedule key deletion. So if someone wants to delete this key, there's a waiting period. For this period, the key remains on your AWS console and it is scheduled for deletion. So in case you delete it and you're like, oh shit, I have some data still that needs decryption, you can come here and cancel deletion. So the minimum time after which the key will be deleted is 7 days, not before this. If you still want to delete the key, I think through AWS CLI, you can force the deletion of a key. So in 7 days, it'll wait for you in case you want to cancel the deletion, and then it'll get deleted. All right. So let me cancel that. Go back. All right. Any questions about key rotation?
No, not yet in the chat.
Okay. All right. So let me show you the slide for a quick moment. Let's look at this slide. So it's more of a in-depth difference between Cloud HSM and KMS, about tenancy, about availability, if it's customer managed or if it's AWS managed, about root of trust. So, and what type of security it is provided, what kind of approval it is. So, it's level 3, level 2, or 3. It's more technical around encryption and cryptography if you want to understand the difference between KMS versus Cloud HSM. But basically, the difference is where Cloud HSM, the customer has complete control over the encryption process, and KMS, AWS manages it for you. Any questions? All right.
Nope, don't see in the chat.
Okay. Okay. So that was all about KMS. That was all about data encryption at rest. So all the data resting inside your AWS account can be encrypted using KMS and Cloud HSM. Now moving about to Certificate Manager. Basically, this is the question that one of you asked, right? What is AWS Certificate Manager? So, a secure socket layer certificate allows you to encrypt the traffic between, let's say, your client who is accessing your application somewhere around the world over the internet and your load balancer. So, there would be a load balancer, a publicly accessible load balancer to which your client would be sending requests, right? Would be accessing your console from there. So, to encrypt the data between your client and your load balancer is where you use Certificate Manager. This data will be encrypted in transit or in flight. So, secure socket layer or transport layer security certificates. So it basically is encryption at the transport layer of the module. It secures the communication. All right, so instead of just securing the data when it enters a storage, let's say a storage or a database, it secures it while the data is moving across different services or across the internet to your services, right? So Certificate Manager is a service provided by AWS where you can quickly, like it's a two-step process. You can quickly create a certificate using your domain name, and you can deploy it on AWS resources such as load balancers. API gateway would also could also be internet accessible. It can be also on a CloudFront distribution, which is used to access, let's say, images in your S3 bucket, so on and so forth. So you can quickly create a certificate on Certificate Manager. You can also have automatic renewal and rotation of these certificates, and you can directly use it. All right. Let me just go to the console and show you. This is the auditor role. Let me go to administrator and show you ACM. Let's just wait for the page to load. All right. So here, if I list certificates, I currently don't have any. So I'll request a new certificate. So request a public certificate. And I go ahead and I give my domain name here. So ideally, this domain name should already exist. So I'll just give a random one for now, right? And I can add multiple domain names. So I can give star dot. All right. So for any domain name that matches this regex or matches this, it'll this certificate would be applicable there. So I can attach this certificate. So DNS based validation, and it can be an email based validation also. So email based validation is basically you'll receive an email for that domain name, so for that DNS configuration. It is in this case if you don't have permission or you cannot obtain permission to modify the DNS configuration. Let's say the DNS is managed by some other authority and you're just given a domain name to attach to your load balancer. In this case, you can allow email validation, but DNS validation is recommended. Now we go to the key algorithm. Select an encryption algorithm. So AWS now gives multiple algorithms which you can use to encrypt your data in transit. So I'll just go with the default one. I can add tags here and I can request. As you can see, it's a very simple two-step process, and I can request the certificate. After I request the certificate, it will take some time to validate it to see if this domain exists and if it allows this type of modification, which it doesn't. So this validation will not be succeeded. So I'll just delete this key. But as you can see, I have created a certificate here, and I can also go and manage expiry. So here I can integrate my ACM service with Event Bridge, where Event Bridge notifies me every time a certificate is about to expire. So I can provision a new one and attach it to my services. All right. So that is all there is in Certificate Manager. It is completely managed by AWS. There's not much you have to do here. I just delete this and it's gone. Okay, cool. Let me just go back to my deck. Move it here. Okay, before moving on to Secrets Manager, any questions on Certificate Manager?
Yeah, Aishwarya, I see there is one question. Oh, sorry, there are two questions. One is on the KMS. Which encryption algorithm KMS uses underneath?
I think it's an algorithm AES 265, right, Sanchit?
Yeah, it's an AES 256.
256, my bad. Yeah, but it's a widely used algorithm which is used in KMS. And if you need to use your own algorithm, in that case, you can obviously use Cloud HSM where you can define your own algorithm.
Correct. And there is one more question which is there for the certificate manager. like which
Hmm.
algorithm certificate manager uses. That is TLS 1.2, Transport Layer Security version 1.2. And I think there are some discussions even 1.3 that's coming, but 1.2 is the latest what we are using.
Yep, and I think here, if I go here, so here we can select the key algorithm as well, the encryption algorithm here,
Right.
alright,
Right.
which is I think pretty new. As far as I remember, this is a new feature that AWS has added where we can select the key algorithm.
Correct. That they have. You're right. They have come up recently for the PAM file, the SSH keys for EC2, as well as for the certificate manager. There are a couple of more questions. Is the ACM renewing automatically upon its expiry?
It depends on the eligibility. So here, when I created this certificate, uh, star.demo.com, let me just request it. Right. So as you can see, currently the validation is pending, so it's ineligible for renewal. Right. But to my knowledge, once a certificate has been created and it's validated, it is eligible for automatic renewal here.
Yeah. And just to add what Aishwarya mentioned, there are two possibilities in case for certificate renewal. If you have generated the certificate with a verification slash validation option for DNS, which is pointing to Route 53, then your certificate manager will automatically is eligible for auto renewal if you have generated pointing to Route 53. But in case if you have leveraged some external certificate and imported in AWS ACM store, or you have generated for an DNS, which is email, or DNS, which is outside AWS Route 53, then that's not eligible. So when we generated the certificate, we selected email based approach. So that is why it's ineligible.
All right.
There are a couple of more questions. What to do if we want the wildcard SSL certificate?
Yeah, we can create a wildcard certificate, right? As you can see, I've used a wildcard here to create for my domain name. So this is applicable for all subdomains as well here. So this particular certificate you can attach to any service using a subdomain as well.
Right. So, I mean, as Ashwarya mentioned, that's correct. So you can use, I mean, it is requested that since ACM is like a free service, so it is recommended that you generate for a specific domain and you can generate multiple of them to minimize the surface of attack. uh, like if this one certificate get compromised, then your all the domains and the endpoints which are mapped to it will get hacked, right? So from that best practice standpoint, it is recommended that you generate for per endpoint and add alternatives, right? If you have, but just in case if there is any business requirement, let's say for some lower environment or for testing, and you want to generate wildcard, then it is you can generate it like the example, which is currently what Aishwarya just demonstrated with star or strict.demo.com. There is another question we have is any insights on external CA versus AWS private CA provided certificate?
Let me just go here. I've personally not used AWS private CA. Sansit, have you?
Yes. So basically, the private CA or the certificate authority, right, is generally used, right, for the services with no charges. Again, the big difference which I see external CA versus private CA is that it is at free of cost, right? So AWS provides that particular stuff. So if you want to generate an explicit certificate and leverage it, right, there are certain services, external services which are not compatible with native ACM certificate generated by AWS. So if you want to have the certificate, download it and attach, right? In that case, you can use this private certificate and can leverage the same. But yes, if you ask from an internal mechanism standpoint, how it is generated, the algorithm and all, there is not a much big difference outside what standard of encryption you're using. But yes, one, if I see a big advantage of using AWS is like it's free of cost what you can do, and again you can renew and all other stuff easily. Whereas in case of externally, you have to get and procure, you have to pay the cost for that. Another question what we have is how many subdomains are eligible to available the wildcard certificate unlimited. Interesting question. Personally, even I have not tried, right, when it comes to wildcard, right? So if I talk about any wildcard certificate, let's say star.demo.com, right, there is no as such limitation what you can have, as I mentioned in the previous answer also, right, while ago on the wildcard certificate, that it's highly not recommended to do that. But if you have some business requirement, then there is no specific limitation in terms of the wildcard certificate. But yes, if you have, I mean, in ACM also, when you're generating certificate, you can add alternative domains to it. Like it could be, let's say, abcg.demo.com, xyz.demo.com. Those kinds of alternative domains you can add. Obviously, I think there would be some sort of limits around it. But in case of wildcard, it's there is no. I haven't seen any so far yet. There would be some so after 100 something like that, but I haven't seen personally so far on that limit.
All
Yep.
right. Cool. Let's move on to Secrets Manager.
And yeah, this all are very interesting question, guys. For rest of the other audience, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. Aishwarya and I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah, Aishwarya, please go ahead.
Cool. Okay, so uh, please keep the questions coming, people. Would love to answer them. Let's talk about Secrets Manager now. So I think everyone has come across this use case. Everyone knows about this, where you using an application, and in that application, at some point, you want to log into the database. So there's a database username and password, but you don't know where to store it. If you can store it inside your application, but if you do that, how will you update it? You'll have to go inside the code, change it, and again compile it, which is not also not recommended from a data security standpoint. Which is where for all your applications there's a service called as AWS Secrets Manager, where if you have a database hosted on AWS, if you have any other service hosted on AWS, you can directly store the username, password, or any such parameter inside Secrets Manager. So here in Secrets Manager, you can securely encrypt and centrally audit secrets. So yeah, these secrets can be audited as well. They can be encrypted, and you can also fine grain, again similar to KMS. You can make it fine grained based on who can access it and what application can access that particular secret. And uh, as I mentioned, you can make the access resource based using policies. You can rotate similar to KMS. There's a rotation here as well. You can rotate these secrets automatically, so you can enable automatic rotation, or you can manually rotate them. The secrets can also be replicated to a different region for disaster recovery. So there is something called as S3 cross region replication, right? In which case, if a region somehow in AWS goes down, your data is still present and ready to use in a different region. Similarly, in secrets, there is a disaster recovery option where you can replicate your secrets in multiple regions. So let's just go to the Secrets Manager console. All right. So as you can see, I already have a secret here, right? And AWS even provides you with sample code. So if you want to access this secret from your application written in whichever language, you can just pick up this code here using AWS API, which is Boto 3 client library, and you can access this secret using this code. Let me just go back and create a secret, store a new secret. I'll go here. And as you can see, I have multiple secret types. So if I have an RDS database on my AWS account, I can directly store its credentials here. For document DB, I can store credentials, Redshift, any other database, or a different type of secret. So if I just select this, I have freedom on the format here. If I select RDS, there's a username and there's a password. But if I select any other type, I can add as many key value pairs as I want. All right. So let me just. So for RDS, obviously there would be a database that is associated with that username password, right? Since we don't have a database right now, I'll just select another type of secret, define a username, let's say admin, and give a password. Let's give it a random password, right? This is my password. And encryption. So here in Secrets Manager, there's KMS support. So I can either use this, as you can see, AWS has made sure that by default it is encrypted using an AWS Managed Key. But in the previous demo, we saw in terms of AWS Managed Key, everyone inside the account has access to that key. Therefore, anyone can encrypt and decrypt your secret. So if I select my KMS key, this particular key that I used for S3, I can use it here as well, give it a name, AWS KMS. Okay, give it a description, add some tags, and give it permission. Add or edit resource policy to access secrets across AWS. So I can give a resource policy here. This is similar to, let's say, S3 bucket policy, right? Who has access to various objects inside the S3 bucket? So I can give a JSON policy here and define who has access. If I don't give a policy, this secret will be accessible across AWS as long as you have secret manager permission. So, and then there is replicate secret. So if I open this, I can, as we saw for disaster recovery, we can replicate this secret across multiple regions. So I can just select a different region, let's say Mumbai, and I can use an encryption key, right? So my key that I created in KMS was a regional key. It was only for Northern Virginia. So here I don't have an option for that key. I just have the AWS managed key here. So I can replicate it in Mumbai region. So currently, I will not replicate. How do I disable this? I am not sure. Let me just go back. Next. I cannot disable it anyway. Let me just go ahead with this. Okay, so here I have an option for automatic rotation. So if I turn this on, so there are a few steps to this. So rotation, unlike KMS, is not completely managed by AWS. Here you have a schedule, so you can set up schedule for rotation. There can be a expression or an expression builder you can use here. After how many hours, days, or weeks you can add. So let's say it rotates at every 23 hours. And window duration, so it can be a duration in, let's say, 4 hours. So within those 4 hours it can be rotated at any point in time. So that, and then rotate immediately when secret is stored. The next rotation will begin on schedule. So when I enable rotation, I can select this option where once I create the secret, it will be rotated immediately and then this schedule will be followed. This is for testing purposes. After you create a secret, it will automatically be tested right away and you can see if your rotation works as expected or not. And the last option is rotation function. Here, you have to define a lambda function. So basically this lambda function will have some logic in it, right? So what logic this lambda function will have is it'll create a new secret, but it's not just creating a secret. Let's say it's a database credential, right? So automatically you just change the password to your database. But after the password is changed, you also have to check, make the changes in the databases as well, right? In the database you have to update the password, you have to check if the new password is working or not. So all of these checks are performed inside the lambda function. So this lambda function here can be used to rotate your secret using your own logic. So AWS does not do that for you. You have to define a lambda function to be able to rotate your secret. And let me just disable that for now. Go next. Yeah. And as you can see here, it's given me SDK code, and I'll store the secret. Okay. The secret is being replicated. As you can see, my secret has been created.
Aishwarya, please plug charger.
Yes, that's what I just went off screen to ask for. 10% should work for 5 minutes. Okay. So yeah. Uh, so that was about the options that we get in Secrets Manager. Now, where is my deck? And let me just find my deck. Yeah. So any questions so far on Secrets Manager?
I do have one question for you.
Yep.
What's the difference between parameter store? There is a secret type in parameter store versus secret manager.
Yep. So based on my use, okay, based on how much I've used it, parameter store, what I observed in terms of practicality is it's not that structured when it comes to Secret Manager. As you see, there are different types of secrets that you can store, and also the secret is stored in a particular format, right? Within one secret you can have multiple parameters, there can be multiple key value pairs. In parameter store, everything is in the form of, let's say, a string. In form of string you can store multiple, and it's not that structured. Let me just go to the parameter store console. Hmm. I'm sorry, I'm also struggling with setting up the charging for my laptop side by side.
No worries, take your time, no rush.
Okay, let me just go to parameter store. Yeah. So let me just show you the difference in the console itself. Oh, this user does not have access. Going back to this user. Here in parameter store, let's say I create a parameter here. I give it a name description similar to Secrets Manager. And there's tier. Okay, this is based on cost, so the size of this secret. So here, as you can see, the type of secret, I don't have option to integrate it with RDS or document DB or anything like that. I just directly store a secret here, as well as I can have different types of secrets. So it can be a string, list, or secure string. So in secure string, again, I have KMS. Similar to Secrets Manager, I have KMS here. I can use a KMS key here. So let's say I use this one, and then there is a value. So here it's a direct combination of this name and this value. I cannot have multiple key value pairs. I'll have to parse this string when I access it using my program or my application and list all the objects. So, based on user friendliness, I feel in my application, if I'm using Secrets Manager, it is much more structured and easier to access than Parameter Store. Anything that I missed?
Nope, you're good. I think there's one more question we have. How to integrate Secret Manager with
Uh,
EKS requirement, TLS termination on pod for end-to-end encryption?
hey, Sanchit, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible now.
Okay. Okay,
I
where
think
did
there's
you lose me?
no. I was just repeating one more question. There's one more question.
Okay.
How, how to integrate Secret Manager with EKS? Requirement is TLS termination on pod for end-to-end encryption.
So I feel, let's say, Secrets Manager, right? Secrets Manager will have some parameters that you want to access on your application in EKS, right? That is what the use case is. If, let's say, assuming there's an application running on Kubernetes on some pod, and it's so, I think Kubernetes has some secrets, Kubernetes secrets, that you can internally use to access your encrypted data, uh, which is automatically encrypted there in EKS. So you'll have to have access, you'll have to have Kubernetes based role and Kubernetes based user to be able to access those secrets. So I don't see, first of all, a need to integrate Secrets Manager with EKS. But if you still want to do, we can always create an IAM role and attach to your, uh, let's say, cluster running in EKS, and based on that IAM role permissions, your application running on your deployment in a pod will be able to access Secrets Manager. Second part being TLS termination on pods would need a little more information around that. Sanjit, do you know?
Sure. So yeah, I think what Aishwarya mentioned, just to reiterate on that. Yeah, I've seen many folks leveraging Secret Manager, but yes, that's correct. When you there is a way in Secret in EKS itself that when you are defining this entire your Kubernetes YAML file, you can mount the secrets. Right, as Aishwarya was talking about, Kubernetes also has a way to define the secrets. How are you mounting your entire secret volumes and other things? Similarly, you can mount and integrate your secret manager itself, which is encrypted and taken care natively by EKS itself. We don't have to worry a lot. And as well as when it comes to TLS, right? This entire communication which is happening from your master pod to the all the worker in EKS, especially in AWS EKS, is TLS encrypted by default. So if you check the EKS documentation once, the managed master node which AWS offers with the node is already encrypted with TLS 1.2. And if you mount this out properly, this has been taken care. But yes, the use case could be, instead of TLS, I see that you need to ensure the secrets what you are mounting has a right permissions on the node level, which can read or not, right, on the applications what you have. But yes, you can integrate that, and if required, just ping me offline. I'll give you some documentations around how you can take care of that. I hope that answers the question. Yeah, I think we can go ahead.
Cool. Uh, Moving forward, we talked about rotation, right? So as you can see, the automatic or periodic rotation of secrets is integrated by CloudTrail and CloudWatch. So using CloudWatch events, that is Event Bridge, we can trigger a Lambda to be able to rotate the secrets, and we can use the rotation option as well. All right. So we talked about encryption of data at rest. We talked about encryption of data at transit. We talked about different services based on the level of customer manageability, which we can use to encrypt our data on AWS console. But now, how do we monitor that? How do we monitor uh, the security of our data, the security of our services on AWS? How do we audit that? So for that, AWS gives us a service called AWS Config. So on AWS Config, as you can see, this is my current architecture, right? I've used KMS to encrypt my data. I've used SSL certificate to encrypt data in transit. Now, let's say someone who has access to the bucket and who has access to the data using KMS goes and makes one of my buckets public. This bucket is now public. So even though I have enabled all of this, my bucket is public, and that is a security risk. Uh, in that case, I have a service called AWS Config that is present, which notifies me कि there's something wrong in my account. There is some configuration that has changed, which is now causing a potential risk to my account. All right. So now what I can do is post this notification. I can either go and make those changes to revert that risk, or I can ask config AWS config itself to make automatic remediations here, and then it will be like all is good now. So basically, it's something to monitor the compliance of the different services in my account. It will monitor if everything is compliant based on my policies, based on what I need to be present in my account, and then it will notify me if there's any configuration change which is against my policies. So it helps auditing by recording, as I mentioned, the configurations at the time of change to any AWS resource over time. So at a periodic interval, it will look at all the configuration changes in my account, or when a change is made, it will look at all the configuration changes and it will record it, and then it will check it against my policies. And if anything does not match, it will notify me. So, what are the use cases for using config? There are some very common use cases that AWS has given us already, policies on the console that I'll show you in a second. But is there unrestricted SSH access to my security group? So, on my EC2 instance, if SSH port is open to everyone on the internet, which is very dangerous, or if one of my buckets have been made public, which can also be an issue, or if my application load balancer has changed over time, if there's a change which can cause my application to go down. So I can record all such changes, all such configuration changes on my AWS services, and I can get notified for them, as well as I can set up remediation for them. So I can get notified using SNS notifications. So AWS config is uh, by default integrated with SNS to be able to notify us through email or through messages on the change in configuration, and it is a regional service. This configuration data can also be stored in S3 for manual audit later. So there are in AWS config, there are over 75 configuration rules. As we talked about a few before, there is unrestricted SSH access, if my bucket is publicly readable, if my bucket is publicly writable, so on and so forth. Here I've given an example where it can evaluate if my block storage is of a particular type. So now this is not a security risk, but this is a compliance sort of a rule where I want all my EBS disks to be a particular type, or all my EC2 instance should be T2 micro, should not be bigger or should not be smaller than that. Therefore, here, apart from security audit, it also helps us maintain compliance using all of these rules. And these rules can be evaluated and triggered either for a config change, or if there's a change in configuration across any service in my AWS account, it will record that configuration change. Or we can set up scanning at regular time intervals. It will scan, let's say, at every 30 minutes, and it will check what all configurations have changed, and it will record that. Pricing, as you can see, for there's no free tier, but it's $0.003 per configuration item that it records, which seems like to be a small amount, but when it starts running at regular intervals, this price can increase rapidly. And there is 0.001 per config rule evaluation. So let's say if you have multiple rules, so for each rule, this is the amount that you will be charged. So talking about the remediation, before that, let me just go to the console here and go to config.
Actually, I think there is a question in the meantime.
Yes,
In the config, but to get the alerts, we need to define a policy, right? Where we need to define it.
yes, let me just show you. I'm just enabling config on my account. Hopefully, this goes well. Okay, let me just view the dashboard. It's taking some time to load. So, once we've enabled config, I can go to rules, let's say, and I add a rule. Right, so now I have an option to add AWS Managed rules. I can create a custom Lambda rule or custom rules using Guard. Okay, so Guard is not something I have explored. Let's talk about AWS Managed rules, which are enough for us to cover all the general use cases. And we can create a custom rule as well. Like I talked about compliance, right? If you have a specific compliance that you want to manage, where you can define a custom rule. But in AWS managed rule, let's see. So there are, as you can see, multiple types: access key rotated, NIM, it's periodic, then account part of organization or not, ACM certificate expiration check. If I go to search for S3, let me just, hmm, not searching. Okay, let me just get to S3. Okay. So for S3 last backup recovery point created, life cycle policy. If I've set up a life cycle policy on my S3 objects, resource protected by a backup plan. If there's a AWS backup service enabled on S3 resources, so on and so forth. Let me go back. Hmm. So if server side encryption is enabled, if notifications are enabled, you get the idea, right? So all the possible use cases that you can think of in a general AWS account in an application running are covered by these rules. I can select one or more rules and I can enable them. So I'll just select, let's say, Hmm. Bucket public read prohibited. So on my S3 bucket, I have prohibited public read access. So if any S3 bucket comes up where public read is enabled, my config should alert me, right? So I'll just enable this. Now for this particular rule, I have to pick the evaluation method. As you can see, detective evaluation has been enabled already since I enabled my config. Now, scope of changes. So there are three types of scope when any resource recorded by config is created, changed, or deleted. So any and all changes here can be scanned, or I can pick a particular resource. So I'll go to S3 bucket and I'll pick, let me just AWS resource and go to S3 bucket and resource identifier. So I can give a name of my S3 bucket here. Let's see, I have this bucket. I give a name and I'll pick a frequency. So it's scanned every 1 hour. All right. Parameters, rules. Next. So I have enabled this particular rule and it will be scanned either when there's a configuration change on my S3 bucket or it's periodically anyway scanning at every 1 hour. And I'll add this rule. Okay. So now I can add multiple rules here, as you can see, right? Now I go to the dashboard. Here it will show me the metrics. It will show me all the rules that are compliant or not. It will show me how many configurations items were recorded here, right? And all different types of metrics I can see here. So currently there are 0 non-compliant rules, and since I've not made a change in my S3 bucket, it's not scanned it yet, so it's saying 0 compliant rules as well. So if I go to my S3 bucket here, let's say I make any change in the properties. So let's say I edit this and I make it SSE S3 encryption. Okay. Now I go to my config and I refresh this. So this was a simple configuration change. So my AWS config should have recorded this configuration change and should have seen that it is still compliant, right? So now you can see there is one compliant resource. So this is my S3 bucket. Is compliant to the rule that I have currently enabled. I can enable multiple rules here. So now if I go to public accessibility, I did this and I remove block all public access. Okay. And I confirm. So now as you can see, objects can be public, but they are not public. I'll have to define a bucket policy here to allow public accessibility, right? So here I'll just go to ACL. So I'll just edit this. I'll enable ACLs. I'll acknowledge that I've enabled ACL. Save changes. Go to ACL. Go to everyone and I'll allow list and read access. So this will make my S3 bucket non-compliant. I understand. Save changes. Now it's publicly accessible, right? So now I go to config and I refresh. Let's wait and see. So usually this happens right away. Usually it right away detects that my bucket is non-compliant. Oh, unusually high traffic. Let me just refresh. Okay. Let's see, the rule is still compliant. What rule have we implemented? Public read prohibited. So it should ideally work. Let me just go to the resources. Oh, did I? Hey Sanchit, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Okay. Just checking.
No, I think for the first time you just enable it, right? So it will take some time to scan all the inventory of the account, and then you should.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so I did make my bucket publicly readable. So let's just check, go through our deck and just come back here and check if it has worked or not.
I'm pretty sure by the time we finish up our quiz and other stuff, you should have this alert generated. So no worries, I think you can continue with your presentation.
Cool. All right. So, as we just saw here, right? So, AWS config will monitor my resources and check all the configuration changes according to those rules. So, I've added some X number of rules. If there's a configuration change, it will check that change across all those rules. If it's compliant, then fine. If it's non-compliant, it will trigger an alert. If we want, we can also set up remediation. So in terms of remediation, we can attach a lambda function to that particular change. So if there's a change, we can attach a lambda function there. As soon as my config will trigger an alert, this lambda function will run, and based on the type of rule, it will automatically remediate that. So in this case, my S3 bucket is public. So as soon as config will set up an alert for non-compliant rule, my lambda function will run and block all public access. And in that case, my bucket will again become private. So now in config, as I mentioned, it notifies us, right? If we have a non-compliant resource. There are two ways to set up a notification in config, which is something that I came across while I was working with it. So one is the integrated option of SNS in AWS config. So for any given configuration change, whether it's compliant, non-compliant, whether a scan is running or not, if we set up the implicit SNS option in config, for any such event, it will notify the admin. So on that given email, SNS will notify the admin for any such thing, which can be quite noisy, where you are notified for every configuration change, compliance, non-compliance, everything. So in that case, in AWS config, it is set to trigger an event bridge event. Based on that non-compliance, and event bridge event is sent out to can be sent out to Lambda, can be sent out to SNS, and only in case of non-compliance you will be notified, or only in case of non-compliance your Lambda function will run remediation. So this is a more preferred technique, but you can always, in the beginning, enable SNS with AWS config, which is an implicit option in the configuration. But there you will be notified of all the events happening in AWS config. All right. Before we move forward, are there any questions?
Yeah, I think there is one question which was very interesting, which I saw from the audience was the best part of this config, as I think Aishwarya also mentioned, and I think we saw in our second session where Shashank Abhishek also talked about when he was deploying the control tower. If you have not gone through that, I'm pasting the link in the chat. Please go through it today after the session. This is what I think Shashank was also talking about, right? There are two approaches where you can go manually define config and other stuff, where it becomes very difficult, how what you need to do, how you need to do, and think of like you have 20, 30 accounts. It's really a painful task. That's where this entire control tower concept got into the place, where you not only define certain out of the box config rules, the basic one, right, or the must needed one, but also you integrate them with your security hub. Many a times we do all of the security not as a best practices but as a fear of compliance or auditing. Again, it should not be that the case. We should always focus on security part, but many times I've seen that it has been done with the fear of auditing, that hey, I have to get SOC 2 type 2, I have to get this certification or that compliance need, and for that fear or to achieve that compliance, we have to enable config and integrate that as a part of the security hub. Security hub is that entire, as a name suggests, right? It's a kind of that exhaustive reporting with remediation steps across all kinds of regions, across all of your regions, will get you that consolidated place, right? So you might feel that, okay, you're doing this config on the region. What happens if I'm working on 10 regions in an account? So security hub will help you that. And to seamlessly automate all of this is that control tower, which we demonstrated in our end-to-end demo in session 2. I've posted the link in the chat. Please go through that. But that's how you'll get this entire thing. It's that Lego brick kind of one step at a time. But overall, if you see how you can rightly build that security posture, not only that, but how you can remediate whatever the findings you get at Consolidated Security Hub, which has flown through via config. And if you start fixing that each item, config automatically starts signaling back to Security Hub, and you'll start seeing an improvement in your account score. So don't get confused. We are trying to get into each of the smaller blocks so you understand how exactly things are going into Security Hub, how that report is generated, what is a behind the scene mechanism. And you will see all those kinds of overall view in our next upcoming sessions, where our next speaker will try to walk you through around Security Hub, generate some reports, and there you will try to connect this dot. Okay, yeah, we saw this config. Now this config rules are getting into Security Hub, and then you download this report on the account level. So that's what I want to just say. Whenever you see any Security Hub or any sorts of reports, those all reports are generated by Security Hub, but the alerts and the notifications are because of the config rules which you are defining. Some of them are custom. Even you can manually define your own posture, but it is out of the box. AWS provides a very exhaustive checklist. And yeah, I would still request everyone. It was a very interesting session. Personally, I have also learned from Abhishek, right? Sashank Abhishek. I have posted the link. I would request all the audience who are watching live or on demand, please go through that session. You will really love it. Yeah, Aishwarya, sorry. Good, please go ahead.
All right. Okay. So that was all on config. Now, as we saw all through this deck, there were multiple types of log management that was mentioned, right? There's Cloud Trail and there's Cloud Watch that is mentioned, and there is AWS config. So, as we know in Cloud Trail, let me just present this. All the API calls are already recorded. Everything that is happening across your AWS account, any type of, even if you're like searching a service and redirecting to that services console, that is also stored in CloudTrail. So what is the difference here between CloudTrail, CloudWatch, and config? Like what different types of information do all three of them provide? So as I mentioned, CloudTrail gives you API level monitoring. So all the API calls, who made what changes, IAM level monitoring. So which user or which role is making what call, and were they able to access or were they denied access. All right. AWS config, on the other hand, records the config level changes. So these changes will obviously be there in CloudTrail as well, but they won't be sending out alerts for those changes in CloudTrail. There is no way to set up an alert for a particular change, right? But in config, for these uh, changes, these config changes, you can set up an alert. You can get to know what changes were made for a particular compliance or non-compliance scan, and you can get notified regarding what changes were made based on those rules that you have created, right? And besides these two, there's also CloudWatch, where basically in CloudWatch you can monitor performance. You can monitor different types of metrics: CPU, memory, uh, like network in, network out. All of these types of metrics are monitored in CloudWatch with respect to your databases, with respect to EC2 instances, so on and so forth. This is basically resource monitoring. So sort of a subset where all the resources are being monitored, all the resources capacity is being monitored, and there's some sort of a future prediction or analysis. So if you go to the CloudWatch console, you can see you can set up some sort of a prediction based on the previous use of your, let's say, a database instance. What will be the uh, predicted use of CPU or memory for that particular instance. So these are the three types of like, let's say, log and metric management services basically in AWS. and there are three different utilities. So CloudTrail can be overall used for auditing your entire account and making calls. So let's say if you don't have config enabled and someone deleted a bucket and you want to find out the root person who has done it, so you can always go to CloudTrail and you can search for a delete bucket event, and you can see which user has accessed that particular API call. But in order to not do that in terms of large scale projects with multiple accounts, as Sanjit mentioned, AWS config can do that type of config change monitoring for you and will notify you if that has taken place or if that has happened. All right, any questions on the difference between these three?
Yeah, audience, if you have any questions, any thoughts on this one, please put in the chat. And also, as I mentioned, we will be starting with the quiz soon in few minutes. So please do register if you haven't.
All right. Oh, I think config did find that my bucket had been. So this is, I think, the universal time. So at around 6:30 UTC, my bucket, there was a change that was recorded. All right. And if you can see non-compliant resources, as soon as it loads, well, I think it's an internet issue for me, but as you can see, since I was only recording one resource, that was my S3 bucket. As you can see in the rules and the resources, there is one non-compliant rule. So if I had multiple rules, I could check which particular rule is being breached. So here it says that one public read prohibited has been breached, and that one particular resource, this S3 bucket, is non-compliant right now. And for this non-compliant resource, I can again, when this event happens, I can set event bridge there, and using event bridge I can trigger a lambda function and automatically make my bucket private again. So if I go here and I make this private, my config will be able to record this change and my bucket will again become compliant. All right, I think that was all from my side. Thank you all.
Thank you, Aishwarya. And I can see one question: can I use config to alert if an access key of any user is not being used in last 30 days? I think you can set up, again, I don't know the use case, what exactly is that. Uh, but yes, if there is anything, you can set up via custom rules around the same, where you can identify via CloudTrail what was the last action that was done around the keys and can try to see that. There is something called
Yeah,
as
and I
last.
think,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that's where access analyzer and I think credentials, IAM summary also can help. I think that was covered in a previous session.
Right. And when you see the console also, right, in the access key, if you describe your keys, there is something called as last usage. So that last usage column or the metadata is what you can leverage to identify whether the keys was used in the last 30 days or not. There's one more question. If I want bucket to be public and don't want trigger lambda to auto update block access, how we can exclude it? So
So,
basically,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Aishwarya.
Yeah, so in config, you can configure which buckets you want to monitor. So it can you can mention if you want to monitor that particular bucket or not, right? So you can mention identifiers for what all resources you want to monitor for a given rule that you are enabling, and that way you can exclude that bucket.
Yeah, and also to add, right? I mean, not just bucket. There are many times there are a couple of things which are recommended as a best practice, but due to business requirement, we have to enable it, right? We know, and it's a proactive way we have to enable it. So remediation part is not something yeah, you can do remediation or fix of any gaps with help of Lambda, but it's not automatic. You can manually go figure out what the findings are from and config recording, and then also that you can do. So you can suppress the warning also. Let's say, for example, if there are certain findings which are via config and that are business rules, not only you can do it manually, but you can even suppress those warnings. There is one more question, Aishwarya. Where are those AWS config rules stored? Is it within the service itself?
Yes, it's here within the service. As you can see, you can go to these rules and you can add a rule here, and this is something that is provided by AWS itself, all of these rules. So they are stored in the AWS config console itself, where you can access them and look at them. But the configuration changes, if you're talking about, they can be stored inside an S3 bucket. You can store those configuration changes and events inside an S3 bucket.
Cool. I think those were interesting questions. Guys, if you have more questions, please put it in the chat. If not, then we'll quickly move towards the quiz section. Tejas is with us and he's really excited for the quiz today.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Tejas.
Yeah, hi, Sanchit. Hi, Aishwarya.
Hey Tejas.
Can I share my screen? Okay.
So, yeah, guys, I mean, if you have any questions, Aishwarya is with us. She's in the backstage. So, feel free to put the question in the chat. But there is a quiz link. We will be starting with the quiz in few minutes. I'm posting the link in the chat. The link is on the screen. Please do register. We'll be starting with the quiz soon. And yeah, as I mentioned, Aishwarya is with us. If you have more such interesting questions or any use cases, please put in the chat. Aishwarya and I'll be happy to answer it.
Yeah, people has asked a lot of good questions. No, it's my time to ask them the questions.
Good one. So we'll wait for 2 more minutes for the folks to join and then we will start.
Yeah.
I'll request everyone. And again, yeah, just to call out, this is a tournament. Please don't feel that we are not going to give the rewards to the winners. We just want to make sure the rewards are very interesting and exciting for you guys. So please go to the tournaments. You are already halfway through. There are a few more sessions lined up. I would say approximate 5 more sessions lined up. And at the last session of our finale, we'll have a leaderboard live for everyone where the first 3 winners will get the best prize. So please do participate in all the quiz after the sessions and make sure that you are there in the top 3 for the finale session.
Yeah. Just to add something here, 5 sessions are enough to turn out the leaderboard. So if you are starting today, then also you can turn the leaderboard.
I think let's start.
Okay. Okay, so let's start, guys. Here we go with our first question. Okay, be ready. Okay, CMK can encrypt or decrypt data up to dash in size. Okay, what's the data size? 2 KB, 4 KB, 6 KB, or is it 8 KB? Okay, CMK can encrypt or decrypt data up to dash in size. Okay, what's the size, guys? Okay, so the answer was 4 KB, and 4 participants have given the right answer. Okay, on the leaderboard we have Prasanna, Senthil, and Akilan. Okay, let's move to the next question. Question number 2. Symmetric keys has public and private key pair. Okay, public key to encrypt and private key to decrypt. Is it a true or a false statement? Okay, 10 seconds, guys. Symmetric key has public and private keys. Is it a true or a false statement? Okay, 89% have given the correct answer. That is false. Asymmetric key has public and private keys, but symmetric key has only a single key. Okay, there is a change in the leaderboard now. We have Akhilan on the first place, second is Prasanna, and third is Agnik. Okay, let's move on to the third question. Which of the following is not a type of KMS keys? Is it a customer managed keys, AWS managed keys, AWS owned keys, and client shared keys? Okay, read the question carefully, guys. Which of the following is not a type of KMS keys? Okay, last 3 seconds. Good. The answer for it is client shared keys. So we have these three as the types of KMS keys, but we don't have this key. Okay. And there is a change in the leaderboard again. We have Akalan on the first place, Agnik on second, and third, Senthil. Okay. Let's move on to the next question. That is question number 4. Which type of KMS key require automatic rotations? Okay. So here require is the main keyword. Okay. Is it customer managed key? Is it AWS owned keys or AWS managed keys? Okay, the rotations are optional and in some cases it is required. So which is the required one? Okay, 2 participants have given the correct answer, that is AWS managed keys. So here it is required. Here, you know, in AWS owned key it varies, and in customer managed key it is optional. It's up to you. Again, we have change in the leaderboard. We have Arvind coming on to the first place. Second place is Akilan, and third place is Nishit. Okay, let's move on to the fifth question. Okay, guys, buckle up. We have 6 more questions. Dash allow traffic between your client and your load balancer to be encrypted in transit. Is it a domain name or SSL certificates or SSH certificates, or is it an IP address? Okay, 9 seconds, guys. Okay, 90% have given the correct answer. The answer is SSL certificates. And the leaderboard remains same. Let's move on to the next question. That is question number 6. Which AWS service helps with auditing by recording configuration and changes in AWS resources over time? Is it CloudTrial, CloudWatch, Config, or AWS Resource Manager? Okay. Which service helps in auditing by recording configuration and changes in AWS resources? Okay, an easy question for all of you. Yeah, 100% have given the correct answer. And there is a change in leaderboard. We have Arvind on the first place. On the second place, we have Akilan. And the third place is Sagnik. Okay, let's move on to the 7th question. AWS config is a dash service. Is it a regional or a global service? Again, a simple question, but a tricky one. AWS config is a dash service. Is it a regional service or a global service? Okay, 4 seconds. Okay, so it is a regional service. 80% of the people have given the correct answer, and there is no change in the leaderboard. Okay, come on, guys. Let's move on to the 8th question. AWS config comes under free tier, true or false? Okay, can you use AWS config for free? Is it true or false? Okay, let's see the answer. Yes, so the answer is false. It doesn't comes under free tier. There is a minimal cost for using it, but yes, there is some cost. Okay, and again, there is no change in the leaderboard. Let's move on to the 9th question. We have 2 more questions, guys. Okay, here we go with our 9th question. Which type of key can you import in KMS? Okay, so we have RSA asymmetric key, 256-bit symmetric key, 512-bit symmetric key, and RSA asymmetric key. Okay, so here they are asking for import. Which key type can you import? Okay, so the answer is 256-bit symmetric keys. Okay, so this is the key type which you can import in the KMS, and we have a change in the leaderboard. Okay, the first place is secured by Arvind. We have JP on the 2nd place, and the 3rd place is Akhilan. Okay, last question, guys. It may be tricky for you guys. No, think and answer. With which AWS service you cannot use ACM certificates? Is it Elastic Load Balancing, AWS Amplify, AWS S3, and AWS Cloud Formation? Okay, 9 seconds. 5, last 3 seconds, and let's see the answer here. Okay, so the answer was AWS S3. Okay, we can use with load balancer, amplifier, cloud formation, but it is not directly integratable with AWS S3. And let's see the leaderboard now. Okay, on the 1st place we have Arvind. On the 2nd place we have JP. On the 3rd place we have Akhilan. On the 4th place we have Sagdik, and on the 5th place we have Nishit. Okay, thank you everyone, guys, for participating. Congratulations to the top 5. Okay, we have more quiz lined up, so don't worry. You can break the leaderboard next time. Okay, over to you, Sanchit.
Thanks, Tejas. Thank you for hosting the quiz. You are our official quiz master for the event, right? So thank you so much for that. Again, guys, if you Aishwarya is with us in the backstage, if you have any questions for Aishwarya, please put it in the chat. She'll be happy to answer. And yeah, we are done with our week 3 for the series. We'll have couple of more weeks to go, so please do register with us so you are updated with our latest news about the event. I'm putting the link in the chat for the registration page. Please do register with us. And if we don't have any questions, then I would really appreciate Aishwarya uh, for taking out the time from her vacation period to help us with this event, and as well as to our wonderful audience for joining the session today. And I would request everyone, please stay tuned, join the session, participate in the quiz. and we'll have the leaderboard announced at our finale session with much more goodies and the rewards. So with that, yeah, I would share the old link session. I will give the playlist itself. We have created the playlist on the YouTube. Just give me 1 second. Yes, so I've given the playlist link. I'm flashing it on the screen. We have just finished our 5 sessions. All the 5 sessions are been captured and stored in this particular playlist itself. So please go through it, watch. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat in the comment section. I will make sure I'll answer all of them as well as have the speaker to answer them out. So if you have any questions, please put it in the comment as well as you can ask us in the next session too, which will be in the coming Saturday, next weekend. So that's it from today's session. I don't see any other questions from the participants. Thank you so much, all the participants, for the wonderful questions what you have asked and for joining today's session. Thank you so much, Tejas and Aishwarya. And with that, thank you. I'll see you at the next session. Thank you.